First off, this talk is the second talk in the series that looks at the 4 names that Newman University has had over the years. Now, the very first one was the topic last time, and that was Sacred Heart Junior College. And when you do the years, because of the fact that the name change officially happened in '52, although bachelor's degrees or 4-year degrees was not given until '54, I would say there were 19 years in which we had Sacred Heart Junior College, starting in '33. Now, if we look at the dates for this one, it's 21. Now, there would be others who would say, well, you really should use the '54 date because that's when it was the first graduates. No, you've got to use the dates in which you had the change taking place. So, with that in mind, the periods are almost equal in regard to time. You will notice a change when we get to the third one. So I just wanted to point that out as we begin. And the last time I told you that I had to have some kind of structure, so I developed 6 questions. I want you to know that this time I kicked myself several times for picking these 6, but I did it and I'm going to stick with it, okay? And it basically, because I did feel that one of the most important was to trace the mission and to find out how the mission has been verbalized over the years, and you're going to be able to note quite a bit of change in that. And then there was a second one that deals with demographics, and if you recall, I made 2 sentences last time on that. But you're going to find out that something has changed this time. Next, academic programs. Then we're going to look at faculty and staff, and by the way, again, almost everybody who was in the administration for most of the years were also members of the faculty. So in other words, most of those who were administrators also taught. So just want to remind you that that's one of the true things. Then we're going to look at costs. Last time the cost stayed for a long time. That isn't going to happen this time. It's going to be more like today. And then we're going to take a look at student organizations and clubs that were active on campus. And so that's kind of, again, reviewing, that's the big topics that we're going to look at. And so first, how did I begin my research? I reread, and I mentioned this last time, the 2 histories, one done for the 50th anniversary and the one done for the 60th anniversary of the university, and both of them were written by Joyce Solentrop. The second book is actually kind of a picture book. It's a coffee table book, but to be in all honesty, that's the one that gave me almost more information over some big ideas that I wanted to capture. And then, whether you realize it or not, one of the best item for doing research are the catalogs. Because the catalogs tell you more than you would even want to know. And there was a lot of things in those catalogs that could be talked about, but lest you think, why would you even have this and why do you put it out and it seems like it's the same? It changes, and it's very important that it is accurate. And some of the catalogs, by the way, had addendums telling me changes happened, or there were mistakes in the printing. So you had all of those little pieces of paper, and this time I can say that Archives actually does have copies of them. Then, because I knew I had to do demographics this time, I thought, well, I need to have demographics on the student body, and so where do you go? Well, the registrar's office, because that's where all of that was done. And so I called, and I got Christine Worth, because Shirley had her phone forwarded. And so Christine said, whoa. And then she said, well, I guess it was the next day. She says, well, here, no, it was the next week, because it was over a weekend that this was happening. And then what she said is I've asked Sandy Bush to actually, and Sandy is here, to actually finish up this. And later, Sandy walks into my office with a ream of paper. Now, it might have been just a little less than a ream, but it was a stack of papers. Unbelievable. Now, the whole talk could have just been given on those, but can't do all of that because there's other things that have to be done. So I want to acknowledge Sandy for helping out in regard to this. And then the next thing, yes, thank you, Sandy. The next is that I asked Emily Simon, the archivist, to study the materials. I basically called in Emily and said, Emily, look at what I got. I said, I can't take the time. I've looked at it, broad strokes, and then we decided out of this, here's what we'd like to capture. I said, would you please take these materials, create a chart summarizing and interpreting the data. I am here to tell you she hit a home run. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that. And not only that, she hit a home run in the exhibit that just went up yesterday in the Heritage Room, and I really encourage you to go and see that. She's got a theme for this, and she carries it through beautifully. And there is not one error at all, not one thing that I could say that would have to be improved. So I'd like to acknowledge that. And Emily, you want to say what your theme is?
Sure. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Emily. So there is a lot of changes that happened at Sacred Heart College during this time, so it was a little overwhelming to try and figure out what exactly to focus on. But I picked 4 events, 4 very important events, Sacred Heart becoming coeducational, our accreditation, the intercollegiate athletics starting at Sacred Heart, and then the development of our mascot. And I looked through the student newspapers to kind of get that viewpoint throughout the entire exhibit. So it's very interesting. If you would like to see a key to the city of Wichita, because we have one, and basketball from the very first basketball game, or what else do I have in there? Some original ideas for the mascot. You should go to the Heritage Room and check it out. It's pretty cool.
Okay. Thank you, Emily. At the very end of the talk last time, I told you here are the mission key points that were for 51 to 53. So this is an overlap, and I thought, well, we need to start here. Because at this time, this was still called the purpose of the university, the purpose of the college. And I've got the first one, as you can see, says that Sacred Heart College strives to primarily to serve the higher education needs of young women, both religious and lay. I want you to remember that statement because you're going to see that change dramatically over these years. Also, that Sacred Heart College points to Christ, providing the planned program of educational experiences, developing true and a finished Christian character. That had been around for several years already, and it was still there, and it will continue to be worded similar to that. Both instructional and cultural programs aim at the development, elevation, and perfection of the whole Christian. So taking a look at the whole person. And that both liberal arts education and professional training were foundational. So that's something that we had come to by that time, and now let's go and see what then happened as such. From 53 to 55, it is now called a general objective, and then we will have specific objectives. So what we would call mission, that's the terms that were being used at that time. The general objective is to provide continuation of the Christian education of women in Wichita Diocese within 4 years of our liberal arts program. That is the first time Wichita Diocese has actually been stated at all, okay? Which I found kind of interesting. And of course, it's still saying women. Specific objectives to develop critical thinking and effective communication Are we still doing that today? Yeah, it's in our documents, it's right there. So you're going to begin to hear the terminology that's being used today to transmit the heritage of theological, philosophical, natural sciences. Some of these terminology is pretty interesting in regard to it. To inculcate appreciation of the arts, to impart one's rights and duties as a member of society, while strengthening virtues needed to observe these duties. So in other words, rights, responsibilities. And uphold the basic freedoms and foster democracy. If you recall, we noticed some of that in the last one over World War II, but now as we go into those years after the war and actually into the Korean War too, we notice the whole idea about democracy being something up in the forefront, as well as to safeguard health and develop gracious living, aid by counsel whenever needed. I found that kind of interesting too. Then, for 55 to 59, the general objective was the continuation of Christian education of women, irrespective of race or creed. First time that is brought in. Why should that not surprise you? Brown versus the Board of Education, ever heard of that Supreme Court case? And was enforced big time in the year 1957. And I think 57 lies right in the middle of those years, okay? So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that we've got that stated clearly. Through 4 years of liberal arts program, specific objectives to encourage intelligent, responsible participation in religious activities, provide a program of general education, related academic programs, theoretical, practical, productive, civic responsibilities, just shortened to that, sound health via physical education program, and to provide a program in a specialized field, a career choice. First time that is actually stated as such. 59 to 64. Now I'm going to stop a second. We have some people in here who actually went to Sacred Heart College. Probably there would have been more if there weren't some other things occurring. Go ahead and get your lunch and then sit down, you'll be fine. Just make sure you can see the screen. Okay, could I have a show of hands of anybody who went to Sacred Heart College? Raise your hand. Now, I want to make sure that I'm right on this. Okay, by the group that's here, we're saying that they are all sisters excepting for Shirley Reed, okay? Now, we adopt Shirley, I just want you to know that. So anyway, but the point is there are a number of individuals. I hope that at the end of this, there's going to be a little time to hear from some of them because they span a period of time. One of those individuals, by the way, not only was a student here, but was also a member of the administration and faculty during this time. And also was a member of the first graduating class of Sacred Heart College. Would that person please put her hand up to be recognized? That's Sister Tarcisia Rhodes over here. So she has a lot of these. And in fact, in 59 would be the year that she came back from getting her doctorate at St. Louis University, and I think she became the registrar at that very point. So basically you can see it's about the same. Let's look at the 64-66. The general objective is to continue development of the student. Now here's what I want you to note. I find this so fascinating, the way this is worded. One of the things that Emily told you that she talked about was the fact of becoming co-educational. For those of you who know exactly what year we became co-educational officially, you will note it falls right in this period, 64-66. Now read the general objective and tell me what you find interesting. her. Okay, but notice what was done. The student into a mature, responsible human person. But then it says, fit for her adult role. I just laughed out loud when I read that. Anyway, the next paragraphs are similar to that, so I didn't feel you needed to know all of those. But now look, 66 to 69. We no longer have objectives, we now have the purpose of the college. The personal pronouns are now male. It's too early to use that him, her kind of style that has been used with the same contents as we previously have. The third paragraph is different, and that's why I included it. To achieve this proper and balanced intellectual outlook on reality, the curriculum of SHC is organized in 4 divisions, embracing the 4 areas included in the total horizontal perspective of reality. Boy, if that isn't a mouthful. The divisions are humanities, natural sciences and mathematics, social sciences, theology, and philosophy. So it's kind of, you can see the progression of kind of what's happening with this. And then 70 to 71. This is the last year that Sister Sylvia Gorgeous was the president. The purpose now is 3 paragraphs. The third paragraph said this: in addition to this primary goal of producing the liberally educated person, Sacred Heart College endeavors to prepare the student to take his place in the professional or business world, or to continue his studies in graduate school. First time this is ever said. Allows the student to investigate general areas of humanities, again, reaching those, and pursue a major field directed toward their career as such. And then the last one, 71 to 73. There was a change in the president. A Benedictine priest from Illinois, Father Roman Gagliardi, became president. He brought dramatic changes to the purpose of the college, and it stayed purpose of the college. The former 3 paragraphs became 7, with very different style of expression. The first paragraph illustrates well this change. Have I got anybody in here who can tell me? Well, I'll wait till I get to it. I can't do French, all right? Sacred Heart College is a private co-educational liberal arts college enriched by the Catholic tradition. As such, the college is built upon a dual tradition, Catholic and liberal arts. Within this tradition is encompassed the philosophy of the college. It's okay, thank you. I'm not even going to try to repeat it. The distinct qualities which justify its existence and around which its various aims revolve. In other words, this is getting closer to many of what we would say were the mission of the university, and it's longer, and philosophy, and that, a lot of the terminology. And of course, it's the times too. That's why you change. Now, I have to tell you right now, if I would go on in any more detail, we wouldn't get through. So, this is terrible, Sandy, but this is the chart that we came up with to do this, because, and how you read it, it goes like that, okay? And one of the things that Emily and I decided on, although it did include, it always included fall, spring, and summer. We decided to only do fall and spring. It just was easier to do. So, and I know the summer is important, but that's kind of what we did. Now, what I'm going to do is make a few comments about this. And one of the first ones I'm going to make is for the first one you see there, which is 56. And in this particular case, even though it says, and I'll refer to it, chemistry and biology becoming majors, I want to let you know that there were 94 students. It's interesting, the breakdown of this, because here's how it was broken down. Men, women, religious. Now this actually, for the most part, could be men or women religious, okay? Part-time percentage. So what percentage of the students were part-time? And then what was the total? So that's what you need to know, is kind of what was happening in the information that we got from the registrar. And so in 56, we wind up with 94. But what's interesting is this. The year before, we had 176. Now, this chart doesn't show you that particular point, but that's why I thought I would at least mention it to you. And this is because up until this time, we did have a program with St. Francis Hospital where their students would begin and take some courses here and then go on. That changed in that year. So in other words, that program stopped with St. Francis at that time. So that's why we dropped such a huge number in 56. The next one that I'd like to point out actually was in the fall of 57, because in October of 57, evening classes were open to men. Now I'm going to tell you though too, most of the men were not traditional age. The bulk of them were probably more in their later 20s and some in their 30s in those early. There were some who were of traditional age. And I'm talking about in the 50s now. And also Saturday classes were now possible the fall of 58. So we are actually going to have some men graduate and complete their program, 4-year program here, before we were coeducational. First ones is actually, I think it's 64 rather than 63. In the fall of 65, men could now be full-time students. In relation to that one right there, I'll tell you the number before. In the spring of 65, the number was 331 total. And look what happens, 528. Even the female number decreased, which I find interesting too. All right, another one would be, and I think this one isn't, there it is. The one that's up at the third one from at the top, the enrollment increases from fall to spring. That doesn't usually happen. Normally you go down in the spring, but according to Emily's study of this, there were some academic programs that got started at that particular time, and there was possibly some marketing campaigns that were done to try to attract additional students, and that's what caused this to happen. Okay? Now, I'm going to go back to that chemistry and biology. They were added in the fall of 56 as majors. However, they were not popular majors. People maybe took a lot of courses in the area, but not necessarily majored. It will take until we are co-educational for that to change. So it's going to happen in the late 60s instead, so 10 years later. This is an interesting, what's the definition of a full-time student, Shirley?
12 credit hours. 12
credit hours. At this particular time, it was changed in 58, fall of 58, from 12 hours to 15. But what's interesting is, the next year it went back. And we really don't know what was the reason behind it. We didn't go study it in any depth, but that was an interesting point. Also, in November of 58, Sacred Heart College became accredited as a 4-year college with the State Department of Education. In other words, our education program was accredited. This was something that we marketed big time. And so we have a tremendous increase in the number of students we went from, in the spring of 58, 170 to to 323 in the fall of '58. And I happen to be able to tell you, I was one of those freshmen who came at that particular time. And by the way, I had no plan to be an education major. Well, actually, I guess I wanted to teach biology, so I would have been in secondary, but that isn't what happened to me, so that's okay. Also, another thing, and this I witnessed, and I'm sure that any of us that went here know, international students were present on campus. We had a number of international students, and most of them lived in the residence hall at this particular time. And they came from several different places. And a lot of times we actually recruited, or where our sisters had been, that is often where they would come from. Another one I think is interesting is that when there's a number of sisters who will actually, their numbers decrease, and when that happened, over the years of how many sisters were here, or religious that were studying here, very few were taking theology and philosophy. The interest in those courses dropped. Another one, we started a program in the fall of '71 in which we had Air Force students from McConnell who started to attend in a program. They were all, for the most part, part-time members. And our part-time increases tremendously over this. Another thing which is interesting, in the early '70s, or the whole decade of the '70s, two majors became very, very popular. Anybody want to guess what they were? Not business. Dr. Heck?
Sociology.
And psychology. Oh, unbelievable how many individuals switched to these. That's also a part of the age that we were going through in regard to it. And let me see if there's one more here. Oh, starting in 1970. I think that one shows it. It would be both the one here as well as the one up there. Notice the men and women. What do you notice, Jennifer?
There are more.
More what?
More men than women.
More men. Now I know, I've heard it from a lot of guys that are on campus, they like their odds here. But at this particular time, there were more men than women. And you're going to have to wait until the next talk to find out, when did that change back? Okay, so with that, we're ready to go. Very next. Now I have to tell you, Dana loved, she wanted some color on these. So what she did is she picked 4 stamps to represent it. By the way, I couldn't find a magnifying glass so that I could read exactly, so I'm going to guess on the first one. I think that's a Canadian stamp, because the Queen's image is up in the corner and it says 88 on it, while all the other stamps were first class were 33. But anyway, the very first one is kind of representing, and I think she put it there because of service arts, that she wanted to represent kind of the home ec and all of those areas that were being offered. But you'll notice that in 53 to 61, we had 7 divisions, is how we divided everything. And you can read them for yourselves in regard to it. Then in 62 to 66, we had 8 departments. And when you start reading those, you'll see, hey, that looks a little bit more, this service arts, it was very interesting what they included in that. But it just simply was that time. And you have to remember, this was a girls' school. So being a girls' school, they were actually, you're going to have those particular points covered. The home ec idea, as well as secretarial, and so on, would be under that. Then you get to 66, 71, which is at the time that we're going through North Central accreditation, and we have humanities, social sciences, the ones I listed before, there they are. And in many ways, those become there. And then the big change that I told you kind of happened as we went into the 70s. things are worded differently, and we start recognizing we're giving a Bachelor of Arts, we're giving a Bachelor of Science, and we have some pre-professional programs. And they included dentistry, law, medicine, pharmacy, nursing, and veterinary, like pre-programs as such. But I just find that interesting, some of those changes. Now you have to know the other stamps. Can you see what they are? The early part has got the Beatles, Yellow Submarine. What's the second one? I know what it is, but I thought maybe we'd get them. Dana, of course, picked it. It is. It's the first foot, and it would have been in '69. And then the one over here, the educational programs, it is fashion in the '70s. So you've got the, what do you call those, the pants? Bell bottoms, okay, and the shirt, the whole thing. So I thought that was fascinating. She thought that maybe I wasn't going to like them, and I said, oh, no, I think that's great.
Where did business fit in those 4 divisions?
Okay, in regard to the 4 divisions, business was in the social sciences. Yeah, in the 4 divisions. And then over here, I think, I might have to check on that. But I'm pretty sure that that's where it was. Okay. Now that's my insert page that I did. So now we're going to move to the next topic. If I can get the right page up. All right, now, let me explain that for the most part, you've got a column called Adores, a column called Other Congregation, and that is women congregations, okay? Women religious. Then you've got one of priests, and then you have one of lay faculty members. Initials that you see, I've only identified on the one at the top of that, where it says 7 and it has OP for religious. I want to explain that those were Dominicans. But later, because they're not always the same, I didn't put any initials down. And sometimes there aren't any. The CPPS are the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. So they are priests and brothers. And sometimes one of them might be serving as president. And then if it's a diocesan priest, that's the way I have it. We also have a minister at a time. So those are the kinds of things you see under the priests. On the lay, one more time, where we had some MDs that were in the sciences, I included those also. Now, when you have the officers of the administration, remember what I said. Many times, those administrators also taught. They were faculty members also. One of the things that occurs at this time that did not occur prior is in that first column. And that is, starting in 53, maybe already in 52, but 53 for sure, the honorary president of the college, the honorary president, is the Bishop of Wichita. Actually always listed. And they, by the way, also could have been a member of the board. My understanding is they hardly ever attended. It was an honorary thing. Also, the president at that time, and by the way, the honorary president will last until 64. So, a little over 10 years that will actually be listed. And by the way, when there was a survey done back in the 80s, one of the things was brought out that there were those who, in the diocese, especially a number of the priests, who became very disenchanted with this institution because we stopped naming the bishop as our honorary president. That was one of the conclusions that was drawn, and I always found that to be so interesting. And I looked and thought, well, you know what? It was true when I was here, but I don't think it made any difference to me. You know, and as I did come here to go to school, I was not a member of the religious community. So, it's just I didn't realize it. Also, the president at this time was a member of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, but he was a theology professor That's what he was really here for. Being the president was just simply, it was an honor as such. But there's going to be some changes, and I'll be referring to those. But it does tell you here, we have a chaplain, and the chaplain is going to be a diocesan priest. Also, there will be 6 adorers. You have to know that a lot of it was with the leadership of the religious community. So like whoever was the local superior of the sisters became one of the administrators. And that person didn't always teach or was any other administrator accepting to be the local superior of the sisters. So that was an interesting thing. Now, as you go down, you'll see some of the changes. You'll see where I said no honorary president. You'll see how many others we have. And I find it interesting is that certain places where we add, like the first financial aid will be back in 68, 69. We'll add different places where, different positions as such. During this particular time, we will actually go from a priest, missionary of the precious blood, being president, to a woman president, a member of the adorers, Sister Hillary. And she will be the first member of the congregation to serve in that capacity. Then the next president, you'll see down there in 61, 64, Sister Sylvia, and then it'll list the others as such. Okay, now over here, I want you to notice we left off last time with there being a growing number of sisters actually teaching here. The number increased. We had a lot of people get prepared to teach here. Notice that that number, for the most part, stays in the lower 20s until we get to the 60s, and then there's a push, 61 to 64, to bring more sisters. Notice 30, 32, and on down the line. When I first got here to teach, and I came in 75, there were in the low 30s. So in other words, it's pretty consistent in relation to that. Notice there weren't very many from other religious communities, excepting at the beginning. And then what happened is the Dominicans started educating their own, and therefore they were not so much, teaching here. And then you see the number of priests, and look at the lay group. 29 by the time you get to the end there. But it's just kind of interesting to see. Now, it will be till we can become Kansas Newman College, that the lay faculty will surpass the religious. So it won't happen until then. Anybody have anything they want to ask about this before I go on?
But
Yes.
I see it says one minister under the priest.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what?
He was a Baptist minister.
Wow.
That's what I remember from looking it up. He's a Baptist minister, and I'm sure he was here to teach some particular course. Okay, now we're, yes.
When you say Dominicans,
Yes.
can you tell me?
Okay, Dominicans are a religious order of Catholic women as well as Catholic men. And in this particular case, it was primarily the sisters coming out of Great Bend, Kansas. That's what it is. Okay, now we're going to get to the costs. And if you recall, I said that the cost, remember you kept saying, how in the world did it stay so low for so long? Notice costs per semester. Doesn't happen anymore. Notice it goes 50 to 100 to 115, 150, 200, up, it stayed the same. But the room and board went up. Then it goes 300, 375, 625. So in other words, big changes in relation to that. What I want to tell you, so you can do a quick reading of this without having to do all of it. I want to talk about room and board separately. What you had is it would be courses primarily 12 to 18 in number. Then this is per semester. If it was below 12 or it was above 18, there was a price that was always what you had to pay for that. That particular price is usually given, or it says $5 if it's over or under, okay? So if you only took 11 hours, you would be paying $55. And if you're taking above, you pay, for the 18, you pay $5 for every hour over that particular amount, okay? And that is also always, almost always, it wasn't that's 1 year, but it changes with the very next year. And that is that the audit fee for auditing a class, here it's $4, but after that, whatever that amount was for over and under the fixed rate becomes the same. So it's real easy to read it. I only added where they added some things that I thought you ought to know. This is the first time it showed up. Example, private music lessons. Prior to this, they just didn't list it is all. It doesn't mean it didn't exist, but we just didn't list it. That was the first time it gets listed. And I wanted to point out general fees. When you look at 53 to 55, there's a general fee of $25. And that's not per credit hour. That's just a general fee. Notice though in 55 to 57, it does go up to 100, but the general fee is now included. So you don't know how much the general fee went up and how much the tuition went up, but it's encompassed together now, okay? And course and lab fees, they are always listed all the way through this. I just didn't spell them out in relation to it. I thought it was interesting, 53 to 55, practice teaching, you paid an amount when you were doing practice teaching. Also, first time to find a graduation fee was in 53, 55. And of course, why would that be? Because we have people graduating with the bachelor's degree. So you actually start having that. So those, just wanted to explain those. Now let's look at the room and board, because this is very interesting. At the beginning, the room and board, that's a combined, and this is per semester, is $200. It remains the same. Now, goes to $225. The very next year, $59.62, and I thought this was on here, but that's okay, didn't make any difference. This is when we moved to campus. Prior to that, where the women were living is a home about 5 miles from campus. 204 West 18th Street still exists. I think it's run by the Salvation Army, and it's a rehabilitation center. But in '59, when the sisters officially opened their new convent, which is what we have today, even though it's been renovated since, when that opened, the convent that they had was quickly spruced up a little, and it became a residence hall. And it was called immediately Beata Hall. And Beata is named for the woman who was the first provincial and the one who founded the university, okay? Who made that step. She never taught here, but she really was the one who made that step to found this institution. So in '59, we've got them on campus. Now, Lotus also. In '59, you have a dorm deposit of $15. There had not been that in advance. I just find some of these are just really interesting of how they change. Now, I want you to go to 66, 68. Because now we don't have, so right after Beata Hall, okay, when you get to the end, within that period, you actually have McNeil open. So Beata Hall as a residence hall, now this is the old Beata Hall, no longer exists. When the following year, McNeil is open. So McNeil was a women's residence hall because that's all we had at that time. And so that's where people could be living. When we get to 66, 68, of course this was a very big concern. If we're going to have guys on the campus, we've got to have a place for them to live. One of the first places that they lived was a house that would have been sitting in the parking lot directly west of De Matias Hall. Okay? That's where it would have been sitting, and that was the first men's residence as such. And by the way, that house did burn down. And yes, some of us that are in this room actually lived there. And we're here to attest that there was a shower that the guys could get in with 3 shower heads. So in other words, because you had like, I think 8 or 10 students living there. I'm not sure how many lived there. I just know that they were crowded. But we have pictures of them that they're in history books as well as in the archives. Notice though, in 67, 68 is when we get another hall, and this one is Merlini. So Merlini Hall will open. McNeil will be female only. Female only. Merlini will open male and female. Okay, when it opens. And these are all during Sister Sylvia's time when she was president. Notice the difference in the amounts. McNeil, $350, Merlini, $390. You could get a private room for $75 more, and you paid for your linens. And I would presume that that really was per semester. And then notice that those kind of go up. And then you get like 70, 71, it's $400 for McNeil, $425 for Merlini, and a $50 deposit. Deposit definitely went up. You didn't even get a damage deposit until 68, 69. And I'm quite sure, and I don't want to be pointing and saying it's the guy's fault, but there wasn't any prior to this. So you can't lump that because we know that that will happen to both groups. Anyway, so that kind of explains that one. Anybody got any questions? All right, next, clubs and organizations. There's a lot of them up here. And you know, we can't go through all of them, but I like the way Dana did this. What she did is she put the ones that stayed are at the top, and anytime any new ones are added during that time period, she listed it. Some of them toward the end over there, you might even say, what are some of them? When you get to the 66, 68, when you get to the new ones, it talks about a men's recreational association, and it's got initials. Well, look at the next year. The Alpha Delta Sigma actually is the men's athletic, and the Gamma Delta Epsilon was the women's athletic. So in other words, it was because of the changing times that some of these organizations came to be. Emily, when she told you she did newspapers, she shows the first newspaper as here, the Pacemaker, being new in 66, 68, and you'll notice that we get the name Vantage coming in 70, 71. So you can kind of see that. And then you see a number of changes also in 71, 73. Sister Tarcisia had to leave, but I will tell you this, that it is her work primarily that brought with it in 62 the International Relations Club. We became well known for that club on our campus, and it wasn't just herself, but she was the force behind getting that started as such. Anybody have a question before I go on, because I got to get to the conclusions. All right, 50s. I just had to put this one down. It's not a conclusion, but you've got to see a marketing piece that was there. Sacred Heart's the place for education. Sacred Heart's the place for a good time too. Sacred Heart's best in all the nation. Profs and students all know what to do. WU, Wichita University, may have her football heroes. Wichita U or WU may have a great big band, but the school to rule the rest, and the best is Sacred Heart, the best in all the nation. I thought you'd like that.
Degree of difference.
Here's one of my conclusions. The restructuring of the administration in 54 did affect the presidency. No longer is the president a figurehead. It was Ed McCarthy, who was a Precious Blood missionary priest. He said, I can't do this, the way this new setup is going to be. And he said, I got to resign. He stayed here, though. He continued teaching. And the first Adoran woman was appointed, Sister Hillary. She was the head of the English department. And guess what? When she finishes being the president, well, by the way, she stayed the head of the English department all the way through it, and she continued being that later. We were incorporated, the college, as a separate entity from the religious congregation in '56. These were people who realized if we want to get accreditation, whether it's from the State Department in Education or whether it is by a regional group such as the North Central, which today is the Higher Learning Commission, you had to separate and not have the religious community running the budget and the corporation here. They had to be incorporated separately. And so the early steps, this is when it was done. The very first lay advisory board meeting was held in January of '58. The 25th anniversary of the founding celebrated during '57 and '58. And that was a big, huge celebration. I find it interesting that they celebrated the year before the actual 25 years, because it should have been in the fall of '58. But that's all right. That's what they chose to do. They waited until they wanted not to celebrate when I was here, I guess. State of Kansas accredited Sacred Heart College as a degree-granting institution for teacher education in November of '58. When I came to school here, I had a work-study job. My work-study job was, and I was the only one besides the person who was the registrar. It was a one-person, and by the way, she taught too. When she first got the word that we got this, it arrived, and she had it on her desk, and I did a terrible thing. It was a joke, but I did a terrible thing because she was so proud of that paper, etc. And I had one of those glasses that looks like it spilled something out, but it was sealed, and I tell you, the woman almost had a heart attack. But that's okay. She survived. And by the way, I mean, it was the marketing that was done for that year in the residence hall. That's part of why it was bulging at the seams. 30 of us lived in one room. It was a ballroom, and they were all bunk beds. 15 bunk beds. The number of lay women enrolled outnumbered the sisters' enrollment. In 1957, only 10% of the student body were sisters. Now that's a terrific change. And so, you know, to me, that's one of the things that I think the 50s brought us. We now go to the 60s. Sister Sylvia Gorgeous is named president in '61. Sister Hillary remains head of the English department. I think that transition piece is important to note. Peaceful transitions. Institutional self-study submitted to North Central in '62. In process until '64, when it was denied. A consultant worked with the president and the academic dean, and that was Sister Tarcisia, the academic dean, to make changes to secure accreditation when Sacred Heart College submitted again in '66. Truly co-educational in the fall of '65. That's big. A development director, very first one, hired in '64. Financial aid office, '65. Significant growth in student clubs and organizations, tremendous growth. I mean, the '60s, it was coming, bursting at the seams. A decade was one of social, cultural revolution in the United States. Shouldn't be a surprise that it reached our campus here. Student publication mirrored the revolutionary concepts brewing deep in the student body. And you will see that in that exhibit. There's no question. Now the early '70s. Discussion began in '67 to revise the curriculum. Requiring theology and philosophy courses are now questioned. A survey of graduates was taken in '69. After that, a committee of 10 faculty and students were appointed to reevaluate the curriculum in '70 and '71. Sister Sylvia resigned in 1971. Father Roman Gagliardi is appointed the president that summer. Gagliardi summarized the implementation and recommendations at the fall 1972 opening convocation. We're going to have an open and flexible curriculum. A comprehensive advising system had to happen, but That will always be a problem, I'll tell you. Non-punitive grading system. Challenge courses designed and implemented. Degree completion programs. Associate degree programs. Acceleration by exam for proficiency. Non-traditional credit for experience, and an honors program. A lot of stuff that is still around today. But all of those were some of those, and it was half faculty, half students who worked on that. And I like this. It's going to be the next chapter. Fires burn at Kansas Newman College. Fires of searching, learning, freedom, accountability, love, life, innovation, creativity, Christianity. Our world is looking for young men and women possessing the imagination to spread these fires. We at Kansas Newman College believe that a solid liberal arts education with specialization in a particular field is the best possible preparation for living in and contributing to this kind of world. Amen. Now, I know I didn't hardly leave time again. I don't understand where it all goes. Anybody have any questions, comments? Emily will bring you a mic. All right, she's got a question there.
Why did they change the name to Kansas Newman College from Sacred Heart College?
How about that? That is part of the next topic. And I was a member of the board. I was a member of the board of directors when that was done. So yes, I will have an answer for you. What's your appetite? Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for coming.